Part 3, 12 Ways to Win People to Your Way of Thinking. Praise is well and good, but what do you do when someone disagrees with you? That's the next subject. How to win friends and influence people. In summary, put aside your instinct to fight fire with fire. People don't like to be proven wrong. They don't like to admit that they have to change their minds. No matter how right you supposedly are, they crave importance, and correcting them insults their pride. You may think it's important to be seen as the smartest person in the room, but you'll be resented for this. Chapter 1. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. Arguing with another person does not really make much sense. If you lose the argument. If you win, the other person will resent you for having hurt their pride, and you will still not have truly won them over. And 9 times out of 10, the argument will only make the other person stay stronger in their point of view than they were before. Therefore, the only solution is to avoid such disputes from the start. When an argument starts, distrust the first response that bubbles up in you, as it's usually an instinctive defensive one. And whatever you do, control your temper. Listen to what your opponent has to say without resistance or protest and promise to carefully examine their thoughts. Try to find areas where you agree. This will help reduce your opponent's defensiveness. Chapter 2. Begin in a friendly way. A hostile attitude just invites reciprocal hostility. People don't want to change their minds. They can't be forced to agree with you, but they may be led to think about how to make an animal come to you. Do you chase after it snarling, or do you offer food? A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall. Someone had a tough landlord who increased his rent. Instead of complaining about how this was unfair, he talked about how much he appreciated the house and the way the landlord ran the building, and how he would like to stay another year but couldn't afford it. Chapter 3. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong. When attacked for being wrong, people will defend their opinion to death. They will lose sight of the main point, hoping to find small exceptions that their assertion is true. We form beliefs carelessly but then develop an irrational passion to defend them when anyone threatens to prove us wrong. Consider the story of how the author hired an interior decorator to make some curtains for his home. Afterward, he was shocked by the size of the bill. And when he mentioned the price to a friend, she exclaimed that he had clearly been overcharged. Insulted, the author defended his actions, explaining that the high price was an indicator of quality. But then, when another friend dropped in and started to praise the same curtains, this time the author admitted that he actually felt he had overpaid and regretted the purchase. This positive approach disarmed him, and he could freely admit his mistake. You see, whenever you tell someone they are wrong, you are basically saying, "I am smarter than you." This is a direct attack on their self-esteem, and they will want to retaliate, because you're clearly disrespecting their opinions. Chapter 4. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. Once the author was out walking his dog Rex in a nearby forest. Rex liked to run free, and so was not wearing a muzzle or leash. Unfortunately, they encountered a police officer who sternly told the author that this was illegal. But that just this once he'd let them off with a warning. The author obeyed, but Rex didn't like the muzzle, so pretty soon, they returned to their old ways. That's when the same officer caught them again. This time, even before the officer opened his mouth, the author himself expressed how very, very sorry he was and how unacceptable his misdeed was. Normally, the officer would have probably been angry and handed him a fine, but thanks to this upfront admission of guilt, he did the opposite. The officer began arguing that the little dog really wasn't hurting anyone, accepted Carnegie's apology, and let them continue on their merry way. Admitting your mistake helps, because the other person is usually trying to feel important by criticizing you about your mistake. But the moment you admit your guilt, the situation completely changes. Now, in order to feel important, they can no longer attack you, but rather have to show generosity by forgiving you. This is exactly what made the police officer so lenient in the example. So, the next time you realize you're in the wrong, admit it enthusiastically. It will produce better results, and you'll find it's actually much more enjoyable than having to defend yourself when the other person points out your mistake. Chapter 5. Let the other person do a great deal of talking. Someone who disagrees with you will not pay attention to you while they are crying for their own expression, so encourage them to express their ideas fully. I'm sure you have seen arguments where neither person was listening to the other, because they felt like their points were not being acknowledged by the other side. So always resist the temptation to interrupt the person. This is costly. Every time you do it, imagine there's an empty bottle that fills as the person talks. When she fills the bottle, she becomes much more receptive to new thoughts. Before the bottle is full, she feels unheard. Every time you interrupt, you empty the bottle and she has to start again. Chapter 6. Honestly try to see things from the other person's point of view. If you were born in the same body as your partner, had her experiences, and saw the world through the same lens, you would, by definition, arrive at the same conclusions. Consider the other person's ideas and feelings as important as your own. Imagine looking outside from another person's body. Adopting this attitude is actually productive. It will help you discover your partner's interests and articulate your argument to appeal to their interests. For example, put yourself in the interviewer's place. Do you think she enjoys the interview process and talking to tens of people? She also hopes that the next person who walks inside is going to be the right fit. She also wants to end the interviews. Change your perspective. Instead of seeing an interview as a meeting to solve your problem, see it as a meeting to solve another party's problem. If you focus on their problems and explain how you will solve them, then your problem will be solved as well. Chapter 7. Be sympathetic to the other person's ideas and desires. Any upset person feels completely justified in their anger, no matter what you believe. Do you think when you're angry, you say to yourself, I know I'm being irrational and my anger doesn't make sense, but I'm going to be angry anyway? People are hungry for sympathy. They want us to recognize all that they feel. If we can sympathize with others, they will appreciate our side as well and will often come around to our way of thinking. Chapter 8. Start with questions to which the other person will answer yes. Every time someone says no, they get locked into defensiveness and consistency bias. So, don't start by talking about the areas in which you differ. Start with what you agree on. Get the person to say yes instead of pushing your conclusion on them. Guide them toward your conclusion through a series of logical questions. This can sound like a trap if the person realizes what you're doing. It's better to do this in a genuine, patient tone instead of in the tone of already knowing the answers. Ask difficult questions with unclear answers so it doesn't feel like you're trapping the person in a corner. This technique is used a lot by salespeople. For example, imagine I want to sell my book summary to you, and I would say, you seem to be a person who likes to read, am I right? You would answer yes. Then I would go ahead and say, do you like saving money? Do you like saving time? Most likely, your answers would be yes again. Once I get these yes, I would then say, buy my book summaries. It's exactly what you want. It will save you time, money, and you will read a book much faster. How would you feel at this point? I'm sure you'd feel like I trapped you into something that you didn't want. Even if you liked my product, you'd probably be turned off by my approach and most probably would walk away. Chapter 9. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. People like their own ideas better than other people's. Coming up with their own ideas makes them feel smart and important. Executing their own ideas instead of someone else's gives them a feeling of control. For example, once I was negotiating with a quite tough person who did not like to compromise. After a while, I noticed that it would be very difficult to reach an agreement. So, I decided to apply this tactic and said, you know about this topic more than I do. You are the world's expert on this. So I want to hear your opinion. How can we reach an agreement? The person stopped for a moment and then started giving me advice and options. His approach changed from being an opponent to a mentor. After hearing all of his options, I chose one of them and decided to implement it. Since he gave me the option, he was much more engaged and interested in implementing it successfully. Chapter 10. Appeal to the nobler motive. A person usually has two reasons for doing a thing, one that sounds good and a real one. Forget the real one. Appeal to their highest moral principles. For example, when someone is breaking the agreement, say that your impression of the person's character was one of high integrity. Give them some time to think about it. If they come back and want to continue, then you will accept it without hesitation and admit that your judgment of character was wrong. But you still personally believe they're a person of their word and will not break the agreement. We humans don't want to lose the nobler motives that we pose. Chapter 11. Dramatize your ideas. Attention is scarcer than ever before. Find ways to capture it without being gimmicky. Merely stating a truth isn't enough. The truth has to be made vivid, interesting, and dramatic. Find a way to visually represent the stakes. A cash register salesman observed a slow-moving checkout line. He told the owner he was losing pennies with every customer. He threw pennies on the floor to make the point. Imagine how effective this would be if he kept doing this repeatedly to illustrate the money lost. Steve Jobs famously introduced the iPod as 1,000 songs in your pocket, not talking about gigabytes of storage. Here are a few tactics on how you can apply this principle: provide a visual analogy, show objects for size, speed, and cost, equate the opportunity to dollars. For example, your business is losing one Mercedes-Benz a day by not fixing this problem. I personally like this tactic and have used it a lot in the past. For example, when I was finishing my internship, I had to give a final presentation about the results. In total, we were around 25 students, and among them, my presentation was one of the most interesting ones. The reason is that when I was presenting, I did not talk about the boring tasks I did in Excel. I simply started by saying that my internship saved $13,000 for the company. Once I said this, every manager in the audience started listening very carefully and asked a lot of questions at the end. To be honest, I did the same boring things as other interns, unless the only difference was that I calculated the number of hours I had spent and then converted it into dollars. Since it was an unpaid internship, I could easily say that I saved the money because if some paid employee did the same job, the company had to pay a salary. Chapter 12: Throw down a challenge. When motivation doesn't work, organize a competition. This gets people going because they don't want to be second. The desire for mastery and to excel is a fundamental driver of behavior. For example, if a person is unsure, subtly question their strength. I don't blame you for being scared, it's a tough job. It'll take a big person to take care of the job. Welcome back, dear viewers, and congratulations on completing Part 3 of our enlightening series on Dale Carnegie's masterpiece, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Throughout this journey, we've explored essential principles such as the value of showing genuine interest in others, handling disagreements with finesse, and mastering the art of influence without manipulation. Embrace these principles as a way of life, and you'll witness profound transformations in both your personal and professional relationships. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you'll be the first to know when we release the epic conclusion in Part 4. Thank you for being an active part of this incredible journey, and I'll see you in the final installment, where we'll uncover the last gems of wisdom from Dale Carnegie. Until then, keep winning friends and influencing positively.